The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Atlanta International Airport as Kira Thompson checked the time on her phone. 6:45. Their flight to Denver was scheduled to board in just under an hour. She glanced down at her 3-year-old daughter Lily, who was busy arranging her collection of small toys on the airport seats beside her. "Which one gets to sit by the window on the plane?" Kira asked, smiling at her daughter's serious expression. Lily held up her well-loved, stuffed elephant. "Ellie wants the window. She's never seen clouds from up high." "That's a perfect choice," Kira said, helping Lily put the rest of her toys back into her small purple backpack, the one with rainbow stars that her grandma had given her for her birthday last month. Kira hadn't been looking forward to traveling alone with a toddler, but so far Lily was being an angel. The promise of seeing Grandma and Grandpa in Denver had worked its magic. It had been nearly 6 months since they'd made the trip, and Lily had been counting down the days on their kitchen calendar, placing a sticker on each square every morning at breakfast. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker announcing the pre-boarding for their flight. Kira gathered their carry-on bags, her own sensible black roller, and Lily's small backpack, and took her daughter's hand. "Remember what we talked about?" Kira asked as they walked toward the gate. Lily nodded solemnly. "Hold hands in the airport. Use quiet voice on the plane. Ask before unbuckling." "That's my girl," Kira said, giving her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. The gate area was busy with morning travelers, most of them looking half asleep behind their coffee cups. Kira presented their boarding passes to the gate agent, a tired-looking man who barely glanced up from his computer. "Have a nice flight," he mumbled, already turning his attention to the next passenger. The jetway stretched before them, its walls decorated with faded photographs of Colorado mountains, their destination. Lily pointed at a picture of a snow-capped peak. "Will we see real mountains, Mommy?" "Absolutely. Grandpa's house is right near the mountains. Maybe we'll even go hiking if the weather's nice." Kira felt a familiar twinge of sadness at the mention of her father. After her mother's death 2 years ago, he'd seemed so lost. This visit wasn't just for Lily's sake. Her father needed family around him, even if he was too proud to admit it. As they stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant at the door offered them a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, her gaze sliding from Kira to Lily and back again. Something flickered across her face, so brief that Kira almost missed it. A hesitation, a question, a slight narrowing of the eyes. "Thank you," Kira replied, ushering Lily forward into the cabin. She'd seen that look before, the subtle double take when people noticed her deep brown skin next to Lily's much lighter complexion. Her daughter had inherited her father's lighter skin tone, a fact that sometimes led to awkward questions or assumptions from strangers. They made their way down the narrow aisle, Lily trailing her fingers along the seats as they passed. Their row was halfway back, 22D and 22E, an aisle and middle seat. Kira had hoped for a window for Lily, but had booked their tickets too late to snag one. "Can I help you with that?" a man asked, as Kira struggled to lift their carry-on into the overhead bin while keeping hold of Lily's hand. "Yes, thank you," she said, grateful for the assistance. The man, an older gentleman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, easily hoisted the bag into place. "First flight?" he asked Lily, who was watching the other passengers board with wide-eyed fascination. "No," Lily said proudly. "I flied before, when I was little." The man chuckled. "Well, you're practically a pro then." Kira helped Lily into the middle seat, then took her place in the aisle. The flight was filling up quickly, passengers shuffling past with their belongings, the overhead bins slamming shut with increasing frequency. "Seatbelt, please," Kira reminded her daughter, who was busy arranging her elephant and a small picture book on the empty window seat beside her. "I'm giving Ellie the view," Lily explained, positioning her stuffed animal to face the window. The window seat remained empty until the final minutes of boarding, when a harried-looking woman with a laptop bag rushed on board. She squeezed past them with a quick apology and settled into the window seat, moving Lily's elephant with a tight smile. "Sorry," Kira said, taking the toy. "My daughter was saving the view for her elephant." "No problem," the woman said already, pulling out her laptop. I have a ton of work to finish before we land. Lily looked disappointedly at her elephant, now relegated to her lap. Kira leaned down to whisper in her ear. Maybe Ellie can look past the nice lady later, when she's not so busy. The pre-flight announcements began, the flight attendant's voice crisp and professional over the intercom. Kira helped Lily find the safety card in the seat pocket, pointing out the pictures of people putting on oxygen masks and life vests. Why? Do they need those yellow things? Lily asked, pointing to the life vests. Just in case the plane has to land on water, Kira explained, but that almost never happens. Like swimming? Lily's face brightened. She had started lessons at the community center last summer and loved the water. Kind of, but don't worry. Our plane is just going to land on a regular runway, just like when we took off. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Kira noticed the same flight attendant who had greeted them at the door walking slowly through the cabin, checking seatbelts and tray tables. When she reached their row, her gaze lingered on Kira. And Lily? Is she all set? The attendant asked, gesturing to Lily. Yes, we're good, thank you, Kira replied, double-checking Lily's seatbelt just to be sure. The flight attendant nodded but didn't immediately move on. She's adorable, she said, her tone light but her eyes searching. She has such pretty eyes. Thank you, Kira said simply, not volunteering the information that seemed to be silently requested, an explanation for why her daughter looked different from her. Finally, the attendant moved on to the next row. Kira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. These interactions were nothing new, the subtle probing, the unspoken questions. Usually she brushed them off. Today, though, something about the flight attendant's gaze left her feeling uneasy. The plane accelerated down the runway, and Lily grabbed Kira's hand, her small fingers squeezing tight as the aircraft lifted into the air. The pressure in the cabin changed, making their ears pop. Kira showed Lily how to yawn to relieve the sensation. My ears feel funny, Lily said, giggling as she exaggerated her yawn. Mine too, Kira said, joining in the game. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Lily's excitement grew. She bounced lightly in her seat, craning her neck to see out the window past their seatmate, who had thankfully closed her laptop during takeoff. Would you mind if she took a peek? Kira asked the woman. It's only her second flight. Oh, of course, the woman said, shifting slightly to make room. Come see, sweetie. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt, after receiving a nod of permission from Kira, and kneeled on her seat to look out the window. Her gasp of delight was audible. Mommy, the cars look like my toys, and the clouds are right next to us. The woman by the window smiled genuinely this time. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? I fly all the time for work, and I still love this view. I'm going to draw it for Grandpa, Lily decided, settling back in her seat and reaching for her backpack. Under the seat in front of her, Kira helped her daughter retrieve a small notebook and crayons. Soon Lily was busy creating a blue and white masterpiece, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. The flight attendants began their beverage service, the cart slowly making its way up the aisle. Kira watched the attendant who had greeted them. Her name tag read Heather, serving drinks with professional efficiency. Something about her continued to make Kira feel on edge, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. When the cart reached their row, a different flight attendant, an older woman with a warm smile, took their drink orders. Apple juice, please, Lily said politely, just as they had practiced. What a well-mannered young lady, the attendant said, pouring the juice into a plastic cup. Would you like the whole can? Kira declined, asking for just water for herself. As they received their drinks, she noticed Heather watching them from further down the aisle, her expression unreadable. The flight proceeded smoothly. Lily drew pictures, played with her elephant, and eventually dozed off against Kira's arm. Kira used the quiet moment to close her own eyes, the gentle hum of the engines lulling her into a light sleep. She woke to the feeling of someone standing next to her in the aisle. Opening her eyes, she found Heather, the flight attendant, looking down at her, that same searching expression on her face. Excuse me, Heather said in a low voice. I was wondering if I could have a word with you. Kira blinked away the last traces of sleep. her mind quickly sharpening as she registered the flight attendant's request. Beside her, Lily was still dozing, her head resting against Kira's arm, the half-finished drawing of clouds and tiny houses, still clutched in her small hand. "Is something wrong?" Kira asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking her daughter. Heather's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just need to ask you a few questions. Perhaps we could step to the back of the plane?" Kira glanced down at Lily. "I can't leave my daughter." "It will only take a moment, Heath," insisted. "Whatever you need to ask, you can ask here," Kira replied firmly. She could feel the woman in the window seat watching their interaction, her attention pulled away from her laptop. Heather leaned closer, lowering her voice even further. "Ma'am, I need to confirm your relationship to the child." The words landed like ice water. Kira felt her chest tighten, but she kept her expression neutral, conscious of the other passengers within earshot. "She's my daughter." "Yes, I understand." "That's what you're saying," Heather continued, her professional demeanor barely masking something else, suspicion. "But I'm going to need to see some proof of that." Kira stared at her in disbelief. "Proof? What kind of proof? Do you have any documentation showing you're related? Her birth certificate, perhaps? Or family photos on your phone?" The absurdity of the request momentarily left Kira speechless. In all her years of flying, she had never once been asked to prove that her own child belonged to her. The implication was clear. This wasn't about airline policy. This was about the color of her skin versus the color of her daughter's. "I wasn't aware I needed to carry my daughter's birth certificate for a domestic flight," Kira said, struggling to keep her tone even. "No one mentioned this requirement when I checked in or boarded." By now, Lily was stirring, roused by the tension in her mother's voice. She rubbed her eyes with small fists and looked up sleepily. "Mommy, are we there?" "Not yet, sweetheart," Kira said, forcing a smile. "We still have a little while to go." Heather's gaze shifted between them. "It's airline policy to verify guardianship when there are concerns." "Concerns?" Kira repeated, the word sharp with unspoken meaning. "And what exactly are those concerns based on?" The flight attendant straightened slightly. "It's just procedure, ma'am." "A procedure that you're only applying to me?" Kira looked pointedly around the cabin, where several other adults were traveling with children. "I don't see you questioning anyone else." Lily was fully awake now, sensing the tension. Her lower lip trembled slightly as she looked between her, mother, and the flight attendant. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, not at all," Kira assured her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Then, to Heather, "You're frightening my daughter." The woman in the window seat cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the flight attendant. "I couldn't help overhearing. I've been sitting next to them since takeoff, and it's abundantly clear they're mother and daughter. Is there some reason you're questioning that?" Heather's expression tightened. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "Actually, I think it does," the woman replied, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "I fly weekly for business, and I've never seen any parent asked to produce a birth certificate or proof of their relationship to their child. So I'm curious about this supposed policy you're enforcing." Kira felt a rush of gratitude toward her unexpected ally, but the situation was quickly becoming more public than she wanted. Several passengers in nearby rows had turned to watch the exchange, and Lily was shrinking against her side, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "Look," Kira said, lowering her voice, "I understand you have a job to do, but I did not come prepared to prove my relationship to my own child, because no one has ever asked me to do that before. Her name is on my boarding pass as my dependent. We checked in together. We boarded together." "The system doesn't always indicate family relationships," Heather replied. "If you could just show me some family photos on your phone." "Why?" Kira interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "So you can see if we look alike enough to be related. My daughter takes after her father. That doesn't make her any less mine." A few rows ahead, a man stood up and turned toward them. "Is everything okay back here?" Heather shot him a glance. "Sir, please return to your seat. This is an airline matter." "I'm just concerned because it sounds like someone is being harassed." he said, making no move to sit down. The situation was rapidly escalating beyond what Kira had wanted. She had hoped to resolve this quietly, to spare Lily the scene that was now unfolding. But the flight attendant's persistence had drawn the attention of too many passengers to diffuse it now. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was small. "Why is the lady mad? At us?" The simple question, posed with a child's directness, cut through the tension. Several passengers who had been watching exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from sympathy to outrage on Kira's behalf. "No one's mad at you, sweetheart," Kira said, smoothing Lily's curly hair. To Heather, she added in a lower voice, "I think we both know what's happening here, and it has nothing to do with airline policy." Heather's face flushed. "I'm simply following protocol for suspicious situations." "And what exactly is suspicious about a mother traveling with her child?" asked the woman from the window seat. Before Heather could respond, another passenger a few rows back called out, "I'd like to know what airline has a policy of racial profiling." The word hung in the air, giving voice to what had been unspoken. Several passengers murmured in agreement. Kira saw a man across the aisle take out his phone and begin recording the exchange. Heather noticed it too. "Sir, recording is not permitted during flight," she said sharply. "Actually," the man replied calmly, "there's no federal law against recording on a plane as long as it's not during takeoff or landing. And since this appears to be a case of discrimination, I think it's important to document it." Lily tugged at Kira's sleeve. "What's discrimination?" she asked, struggling with the unfamiliar word. The innocent question pierced Kira's heart. She had hoped to protect her daughter from these realities for a little while longer, to let her experience the world without the weight of such knowledge. But here they were, and Lily was watching, absorbing, learning in real time what it meant to be questioned simply because of how you looked. "It's when someone treats you differently because of how you look," Kira explained gently. "And it's not right." Heather seemed to realize she was losing control of the situation. Other passengers were now openly watching, some with phones raised, others with expressions of concern or disapproval directed at her rather than Kira. "I'm simply trying to ensure the safety of all our passengers," Heather insisted, but her voice had lost some of its authority. "By harassing a mother and frightening her child," challenged the man who was recording. "How does that improve anyone's safety?" "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording. And I'm going to have to refuse," he replied. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and what I'm seeing here concerns me greatly." The mention of his profession seemed to give Heather pause. She glanced uneasily around the cabin, clearly noting the number of witnesses and the shifting dynamic. "Look," Kira said, trying one more time for a reasonable resolution. "I understand you may have concerns, but this approach is not appropriate. If you'd like, I can show you our boarding passes again, or you can check with the gate agent who let us board together. But I will not subject myself or my daughter to this kind of questioning, based solely on the fact that we don't share the same skin tone." A few passengers nodded in agreement. The woman in the window seat spoke up again. "I've been sitting next to them this whole flight. The little girl has been calling her mommy and showing her drawings. They're obviously together." Another passenger, an older man across the aisle, added, "I saw them in the terminal before boarding. They were together then too, the little one holding her hand." The support from strangers was both comforting and heart-wrenching for Kira. On one hand, it validated what she knew to be true, that this questioning was unfair and based on prejudice. On the other hand, it magnified a moment she had hoped to shield Lily from. Heather seemed to be calculating her options, aware that the situation had slipped beyond her control. The expressions on the faces around her were decidedly unsympathetic. "I need to speak with the lead flight attendant," she finally said, taking a step back. "Please remain in your seats." As Heather moved toward the front of the plane, the tension in the cabin remained. The man who had been recording kept his phone up, capturing Heather's retreat. "You okay?" the woman in the window seat asked Kira quietly. Kira nodded, though the tight feeling in her chest hadn't eased. "Thank you," she whispered, "for speaking up." "No one should have to deal with that," the woman replied. "Especially not with their child watching." Lily, picking up on the continued tension, pressed closer to Kira's side. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" "No, sweetheart," Kira assured her, though her own heart was still racing. "Sometimes grown-ups just get confused, that's all. Like when I can't find my socks even though they're right there." Despite everything, Kira couldn't help but smile at the comparison. Exactly like that. The man who had been recording approached their row, kneeling down to be at eye level. "I'm Michael," he said. "I want you to know I caught all of that on video. If you want a copy for any reason, I'm happy to share it with you." "Thank you," Kira said, genuinely grateful. "I'm Kira, and this is Lily." "Hi," Lily said shyly, half hiding behind her stuffed elephant. "That's a nice elephant," Michael said. "Does it have a name?" "Ellie," Lily replied, relaxing slightly at the normal conversation. "She likes to look out airplane windows." "A very important job," Michael agreed solemnly. Then to Kira, "I meant what I said about being an attorney. What happened? Ree was not okay. And if you want to pursue it, you have options." Before Kira could respond, there was movement at the front of the cabin. Heather had returned, this time accompanied by an older man wearing a senior flight attendant's uniform. His name tag read Daniel. They made their way down the aisle toward Kira's row. Lily tensed again at their approach. Kira squeezed her hand reassuringly, though her own anxiety had returned full force. "Ma'am," Daniel began, his tone more diplomatic than Heather's had been. "I understand there's been some confusion. Could we speak briefly?" "We can speak here," Kira said firmly. "I'm not leaving my seat or my daughter." Daniel nodded, seeming to accept this boundary. "I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. Our flight attendants are trained to be alert for certain situations, but it appears there may have been an overreaction in this case." "An overreaction?" Michael repeated incredulously from where he still knelt in the aisle. She demanded proof that this woman is her own child's mother, based on nothing but the fact that they have different skin tones. That's not an overreaction, that's racial profiling. Several passengers murmured in agreement. Daniel's expression remained carefully neutral, though Kira noticed Heather shifting uncomfortably behind him. "Sir, we take such allegations very seriously," Daniel said. "I'd be happy to discuss this further after we land." "I think we should discuss it now," Michael countered, "while all these witnesses are present and while it's still being recorded." Daniel glanced at the phone, still recording, then back at Kira. "Ma'am, I want to assure you that it's not our policy to question parents without legitimate cause for concern. If you've been made to feel uncomfortable, I sincerely apologize." The words were professional, measured, but they did little to address the real issue. Kira looked from Daniel to Heather, who was avoiding direct eye contact. "I appreciate the apology," Kira said, "but I think we both know this wouldn't have happened if my daughter and I had the same skin color. That's the real problem here, and I don't think it's one you can solve with a quick apology in the aisle." The truth of her words seemed to hang in the air. Several passengers nodded in agreement. "Mommy?" Lily's small voice broke through the tension. "Can I finish my drawing now? I want to show Grandpa when we land." The simple request, so normal amid the abnormal situation, brought Kira back to what mattered most: protecting her daughter's sense of security and normalcy. "Of course, baby," she said, helping Lily retrieve the fallen crayon. To Daniel and Heather, she added, "I think we're done here. My daughter and I would like to enjoy the rest of our flight in peace." Daniel seemed to recognize the dismissal for what it was. "Of course," he said. "Again, my apologies for the disturbance." He turned to the rest of the cabin, raising his voice slightly. "Folks, we'll be beginning our descent into Denver shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are up and locked." As the flight attendants moved away, the cabin gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation and movement. Michael gave Kira a respectful nod before returning to his own seat. The woman in the window seat offered a sympathetic smile before reopening her laptop. Kira helped Lily with her drawing, pointing out shapes in the clouds, trying to restore a sense of normalcy. But inside, her thoughts raced. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such assumptions, and she knew with a heavy certainty that it wouldn't be the last. More painful was the knowledge that Lily, now innocently coloring a blue sky with careful concentration, was old enough to begin absorbing these lessons. Lessons Kira had hoped to introduce gently, in her own way, in her own time. As the plane began its descent into Denver, Kira gazed out the window at the approaching mountains, their peaks still capped with late spring snow. She had come to Colorado seeking healing, for her father in his loneliness, for Lily in her need to connect with her remaining grandparent, for herself in the wake of loss. Now, it seemed, there would be another kind of healing needed. The kind that comes after wounds are reopened, exposing what lies beneath. Michael Chen had seen enough. The moment he'd heard the flight attendant demand that the black woman prove her relationship to her lighter-skinned daughter, his body had tensed with a familiar anger. He'd witnessed variations of this scene too many times before. In courtrooms, in police stations, in everyday interactions where people of color were treated as suspicious simply for existing. As a civil rights attorney, Michael knew the laws and policies backward and forward. There was no airline rule requiring parents to carry proof of their relationship to their children on domestic flights. This was nothing but prejudice dressed up as procedure, and he wasn't going to sit silently while it happened. He raised his phone, opening the camera app with practiced ease. The phone's case bore the wear of someone who documented more than just vacation photos and family gatherings. This was a tool he carried for moments exactly like this one, when power was being abused, when someone needed an objective record of what was happening. The flight attendant, Heather, according to her name tag, noticed his recording almost immediately. He saw the flash of worry cross her face, quickly replaced by authority. "Sir, recording is not permitted during flight," she said, her voice carrying down the aisle. Michael kept his phone steady, his voice calm. "Actually, there's no federal law against recording on a plane as long as it's not during takeoff or landing. And since this appears to be a case of discrimination, I think it's important to document it." He watched as the mother, Kira, he would soon learn, dealt with both the flight attendant's questioning and her daughter's confusion. The little girl's question about discrimination had struck him deeply. He had a niece about the same age, and the thought of her facing such treatment made his resolve even stronger. Several passengers were now watching the exchange with open interest, some with obvious disapproval directed at the flight attendant. An older woman sitting behind Kira spoke up. "I've been watching this little girl with her mother since we boarded," she said. "They're obviously together. The child has been comfortable with her the entire time." A man across the aisle nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I saw them in the terminal. Before boarding, too. They were definitely together." Michael kept recording, making sure to capture not just Heather's words, but also the reactions of the other passengers. This wasn't just about documenting potential discrimination. It was about showing Kira that she wasn't alone, that others saw what was happening and found it unacceptable. When Heather retreated to speak with the lead flight attendant, Michael approached Kira's row, keeping his voice gentle as he introduced himself. The little girl, Lily, was clearly shaken by the confrontation, hiding partly behind a stuffed elephant. "That's a nice elephant," he said, trying to ease her fear. "Does it have a name?" "Ellie," she replied shyly. "She likes to look out airplane windows." "A very important job," Michael agreed, meaning it. Then turning to Kira, "I meant what I said about being an attorney. What happened here was not okay, and if you want to pursue it, you have options." Before she could respond, Heather returned with an older male flight attendant whose name tag read Daniel. Michael stayed where he was, deliberately positioning himself as a buffer between them and Kira's family. The senior flight attendant's apology was textbook corporate damage control, acknowledging discomfort without admitting wrongdoing. An overreaction, he had called it, as if questioning a mother's relationship to her child based solely on their different skin tones was simply a matter of excess zeal rather than prejudice. "That's not an overreaction, that's racial profiling," Michael had countered, making sure his phone captured every word. As the confrontation de-escalated and the flight attendants moved away, Michael returned to his seat, his mind already organizing the incident into the legal framework he knew so well. This was hardly the first time he'd witnessed such discrimination, but it never failed to ignite both his anger and his determination. His seatmate, a middle-aged woman who had been pretending to read a magazine during the entire exchange, finally looked up at him. "That was good of you," she said quietly. "Standing up for her like that." Michael slipped his phone into his pocket. "It shouldn't be necessary." "No," the woman agreed, "but it is." That simple acknowledgement of both the wrongness and the reality reminded Michael why he had chosen his career path. There was something powerful about bearing witness, about refusing to look away when others suffered injustices both small and large. The plane began its descent into Denver, the seatbelt sign dinging on with electronic insistence. Michael secured his tray table and straightened his seat, but his mind remained on the scene he had just witnessed and recorded. When they landed, he waited for most of the passengers to deplane before approaching Kira again. She was helping Lily gather her belongings, the little girl still clutching her elephant and now yawning widely. "Excuse me," Michael said. "I wanted to give you my card in case you want that video or have any questions." Kira looked up, surprise and gratitude mingling in her expression. "Thank you. I honestly don't know what I'm going to do about this yet." "There's no rush to decide," he assured her. "The video isn't going anywhere." She took his card, studying it briefly before tucking it into her purse. "I appreciate what you did, standing up like that." "I've seen too many people face this kind of treatment," Michael replied. "It never gets less infuriating." Lily looked up at him with curious eyes. "Are you a superhero?" she asked, clearly piecing together that he had somehow helped her mother. The UAM question made both adults smile, breaking some of the tension. "No, definitely not," Michael said. "I just try to help people when I can." "Like Grandpa," Lily said with the certainty of a child. "He fixes things for people too." "That's right," Kira agreed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Grandpa fixes things, and he's going to be waiting for us at the airport. We should get going." Michael nodded, stepping back to let them pass. "Safe travels. And please don't hesitate to call if you need anything." As they made their way up the aisle, Michael noticed several other passengers watching Kira and Lily with expressions of sympathy or support. The woman from the window seat gave Kira a small nod as they passed. The older woman who had spoken up earlier reached out to touch Kira's arm briefly, a gesture of solidarity. These small kindnesses were important, Michael knew. They didn't erase the humiliation Kira had faced or the confusion Lily had experienced, but they did something else. They communicated that not everyone shared the flight attendant's suspicions, that many had recognized the injustice for what it was. Michael was one of the last to deplane. As he walked through the jetway, he spotted Daniel, the lead flight attendant, speaking with a woman in a supervisory uniform near the gate. Making a quick decision, Michael approached them. "Excuse me," he said. "I was on that flight, and I witnessed what happened with the mother and daughter." The supervisor turned to him with a professional smile. "Sir, we're handling the situation. Thank you for your concern." "I hope you are," Michael replied, "because what I saw was textbook discrimination. I'm a civil rights attorney and I recorded the entire exchange." The smile faltered slightly. "We take all passenger concerns very seriously." "Good," Michael interrupted. "Then you should know that questioning a mother's relationship to her child based solely on different skin tones is not just poor customer service. It's potentially actionable discrimination." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I've already apologized to the passenger for any misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding implies there was a reasonable basis for the questioning in the first place," Michael pointed out. "There wasn't. Your flight attendant made an assumption based on appearance, nothing more." The supervisor's expression had grown more serious. "We'd be happy to take your contact information and include your observations in our review of the incident." Michael handed her a business card. "I'd appreciate that, and I'll be following up directly with the passenger to make sure her concerns are properly addressed." With that, he continued into the terminal, pulling out his phone to check his messages. He had a 2-hour layover before his connecting flight to Seattle, where he was due to meet with clients in another discrimination case tomorrow. As he walked toward his next gate, his phone pinged with a notification. It was from a professional contact, a journalist he had worked with on several previous stories about discrimination in public accommodations. "Free to talk?" the message read. "Working on a piece about racial profiling in transportation. Heard anything interesting lately?" Michael stopped walking, considering the coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all, given how common these incidents were. His thumb hovered over the reply button. He hadn't discussed sharing the video with Kira yet, and he wouldn't do so without her permission. Instead, he typed, "Possibly. Let me check with someone first. I'll call you later." He continued toward his gate, his mind working through the potential implications. If Kira wanted to pursue this through media coverage, a formal complaint, or even legal action, he was prepared to help. But that was her decision to make, not his. Finding a quiet corner in the busy terminal, Michael settled into a chair and opened his laptop. While the video was still fresh in his mind, he wanted to transcribe the exchange, noting the specific language used and the reactions of other passengers. Details mattered in these cases, a lesson he had learned through years of practice, as he typed, "A family passed by. A father with 3 young children, all of them with matching blonde hair. The youngest, a toddler no older than Lily, was having a full meltdown, screaming and throwing himself on the floor while his harried father tried to calm him." Michael couldn't help but notice that despite the scene the child was causing, despite the father's obvious struggle to manage 3 kids alone, no airport staff approached to question his relationship to his children. No one asked for proof that he was their father, even though he was traveling without another adult. The contrast was stark and telling. This was the privilege of presumed belonging, of not having your connections to your own family questioned, because you matched in the most superficial of ways. Michael returned to his transcription with renewed purpose. These were the disparities that most people, particularly those who had never experienced them, failed to notice or acknowledge. His role, both as an attorney and as a witness, was to make them visible, to refuse to let them pass unremarked and unchallenged. An announcement for boarding a flight to Chicago crackled over the loudspeaker. Michael checked the time, still an hour before his own connection. Enough time to finish his notes and perhaps grab something to eat. He was just closing his laptop when he spotted Kira and Lily again, walking hand in hand toward the baggage claim area. Lily was skipping now, her earlier distress seemingly forgotten in the excitement of arrival, her stuffed elephant tucked securely under her arm. Kira, however, still carried the weight of the encounter in her posture, in the watchful way she scanned the crowded terminal, a new wariness that hadn't been there before the flight attendant's questioning. This, too, was part of the cost of discrimination, the invisible tax paid in heightened awareness, in the constant preparation for the next challenge, the next demand to justify your existence or your connections. Michael considered approaching them again but decided against it. Kira had his contact information. The choice to reach out to take any next steps was hers to make when she was ready. Instead, he watched as they disappeared into the crowd, a mother and daughter heading toward a reunion with waiting family, carrying not just their physical baggage but the added burden of an incident that should never have happened. His phone vibrated with another message from the journalist. "Let me know soon. Editor wants to run something this week on transportation. Discrimination." Michael typed a brief reply. "Will do. Have some compelling footage if the subject consents." Then he put away his phone and gathered his belongings, preparing for his own onward journey. The work continued as it always did. One incident, one witness, one stand against injustice at a time. As he walked toward the food court, Michael reflected on Lily's innocent question. "Are you a superhero?" No, he had told her. Definitely not. But maybe there was something heroic in the simple act of refusing to be a bystander, in choosing to see, to speak, to stand beside those whose humanity was being questioned. It wasn't enough, of course. It would never be enough until such interventions became unnecessary, until the Kiras and Lilies of the world could travel without having their connections to each other challenged or doubted. But until that day came, he would continue to raise his phone, to record, to bear witness. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the face of systemic injustice, but it was something. And sometimes something was enough to make a difference, if not to change the whole world, then at least to change one moment, one interaction, one life. The I-terminal buzzed with the energy of thousands of travelers, each on their own journey, each carrying their own stories. Michael joined the flow, one witness among many, carrying with him the record of what he had seen and the determination to ensure it would not pass unnoticed or unaddressed. His connecting flight would board soon, taking him to Seattle and the next case, the next client, the next battle in a war that sometimes seemed endless. But for now, in this moment, he had done what he could. He had stood up. He had spoken. He had recorded. And sometimes that was enough to start the ripples of change. The airport announcement system crackled to life again, calling passengers for priority boarding on a flight to San Francisco. Michael checked his watch and decided he had time for a quick coffee before heading to his gate. As he stood in line at the coffee kiosk, he found himself scanning the faces of passing travelers, wondering how many other stories of injustice were unfolding around him, unseen and unrecorded. It was a habit he had developed over years of practicing civil rights law, this constant awareness of the invisible currents of power and prejudice flowing through public spaces. Sometimes it felt like a burden, this inability to not see, to not notice. But more often it felt like a responsibility, a necessary vigilance in a world that preferred comfortable blindness to uncomfortable truth. The barista handed him his coffee with a practiced smile. Michael thanked her and turned back toward the concourse, his thoughts still with Kira and Lily, still with the flight attendant whose assumptions had created an unnecessary trauma, still with the passengers who had spoken up and those who had remained silent. One incident on one flight. A small thing perhaps in the grand scheme, but not to the little girl Gui. Ho had asked what discrimination meant, not to her mother who had faced public questioning of her most intimate connection, not to the other passengers who had witnessed it, some perhaps recognizing familiar patterns, others perhaps seeing, for the first time, how differently the world treated those who didn't fit expected categories. Small moments mattered. Michael knew this with bone-deep certainty. They accumulated, these moments, building into patterns, into lived experiences, into the structures that shaped entire lives. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Kira. "Thank you again for your help today," it read. "My father thinks I should pursue this. Could we talk later?" Michael smiled slightly as he typed his reply. "Absolutely. Call anytime." Then he pocketed his phone and continued on his way, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes bearing witness was just the beginning. Daniel Rodriguez had been a flight attendant for nearly 20 years. He had weathered turbulence, demanding passengers, medical emergencies, and all manner of in-flight crises. But the moment his junior colleague Heather approached him in the galley, her voice low and urgent, he sensed a different kind of storm brewing. "There's a situation. In row 22, she said. A woman traveling with a child who doesn't appear to be hers. I've asked for documentation, but she's being difficult." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Doesn't appear to be hers? What exactly does that mean?" Heather shifted her weight, her confidence faltering slightly under his direct question. "The woman is black, and the child is not very light-skinned. They don't look related." The knot in Daniel's stomach tightened. After 2 decades in the industry, he had seen this scenario play out before. The assumptions, the confrontations, the humiliation of passengers based on nothing more than how they looked. As a Latino man who had faced his share of prejudice, he recognized the pattern immediately. "Did the child seem distressed or afraid of the woman?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and professional despite his growing concern. "No, but has anyone reported suspicious behavior?" "Not exactly, but is there any actual indication of trafficking or abduction beyond the fact that they have different skin tones?" Heather's silence was answer enough. Daniel took a deep breath, preparing himself for damage control. "Show me," he said. As they moved down the aisle toward row 22, Daniel could already see the problem unfolding. A small crowd of attention had formed around the row where a black woman sat with a young girl who was indeed lighter-skinned than her mother. More concerning was the passenger openly recording the interaction with his phone and the general mood of the surrounding passengers, which was decidedly not in Heather's favor. Daniel had been trained to handle difficult situations, to de-escalate tensions, and maintain control. But he had also learned through hard experience when his company was in the wrong. This, he could already tell, was one of those times. He approached with his most diplomatic demeanor. "Ma'am," he began, addressing the woman, "I understand there's been some confusion. Could we speak briefly?" "We can speak here," the woman replied firmly. "I'm not leaving my seat or my daughter." Daniel respected the boundary. The child was watching him with wide, uncertain eyes, clutching what appeared to be a stuffed elephant. Whatever happened next, he needed to ensure this little girl wasn't further traumatized. "I want to apologize for any misunderstanding," he said carefully. "Our flight attendants are trained to be alert for certain situations, but it appears there may have been an overreaction in this case." The man recording with his phone spoke up immediately. "An overreaction?" She demanded proof that this woman is her own child's mother, based on nothing but the fact that they have different skin tones. "That's not an overreaction, that's racial profiling." The words hit hard because they were true. Daniel had seen the training videos on human trafficking awareness. He knew the actual indicators they were supposed to look for: children who appeared fearful or drugged, adults who wouldn't allow children to speak for themselves, inconsistent stories about their relationship. None of those appeared to be present here. This was, plainly put, an assumption based on appearance. "Sir, we take such allegations very seriously," Daniel said, trying to navigate an increasingly difficult situation. "I'd be happy to discuss this further after we land." "I think we should discuss it now," the man countered. "While all these witnesses are present and while it's still being recorded." Daniel felt the weight of multiple gazes on him. This was rapidly becoming the kind of incident that ended up on social media, the kind that led to company-wide policy reviews and sensitivity training. But more immediately, it was a situation where a mother and child had been needlessly distressed. "Ma'am, I want to assure you that it's not our policy to question parents without legitimate cause for concern," he said to the woman. "If you've been made to feel uncomfortable, I sincerely apologize." The woman's response was measured but pointed. "I appreciate the apology, but I think we both know this wouldn't have happened if my daughter and I had the same skin color. That's the real problem here, and I don't think it's one you can solve with a quick apology in the aisle." Her words carried the weight of truth. Daniel had no real counter to offer, because she was right. This incident was rooted in assumptions that went beyond airline policy. The little girl's voice broke through the tension. "Mommy, can I finish my drawing now? I want to show Grandpa when we land." The simple question, so innocent amid the charged atmosphere, seemed to refocus the woman. "Of course, baby," she said, helping her daughter retrieve a fallen crayon. "Daniel and Heather," she added, "I think we're done here. My daughter and I would like to enjoy the rest of our flight in peace." Daniel recognized the dismissal. "Of course," he said. "Again, my apologies for the disturbance." He turned to address the cabin, shifting into his professional announcement voice. "Folks, we'll be beginning our descent into Denver shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are up and locked." As he and Heather retreated to the front of the plane, Daniel could feel the heat of embarrassment and frustration rising in his face. Once they were in the galley out of earshot of the passengers, he turned to Heather. "What exactly were you thinking?" he asked, keeping his voice low but unable to hide his dismay. Heather crossed her arms defensively. "I was following the human trafficking awareness protocol. We're supposed to be alert for children traveling with adults who don't appear to be related." "The protocol is about behavior, not appearance," Daniel corrected her. "Did you notice any of the actual warning signs? Was the child afraid? Was the mother preventing her from speaking? Was there anything suspicious besides the fact that they don't share the same skin tone?" "I was just being cautious," Heather insisted. "Better safe than sorry when it comes to children's safety." Daniel sighed, recognizing that this conversation would need to continue later. For now, they had a plane to land and passengers to attend to. "We'll discuss this after we deplane," he said firmly. "For now, stay in the forward galley. I'll handle the remaining service in the main cabin." As Heather moved away, Daniel took a moment to collect himself. In 20 years of flying, he had learned that the hardest part of the job wasn't dealing with turbulence or emergency procedures. It was navigating the complex human interactions that unfolded in the confined space of an aircraft. He had also learned that as a person of color himself, he was often placed in the difficult position of mediating between colleagues who acted on biased assumptions and passengers who suffered the consequences. It was an exhausting balancing act, one that required him to maintain his professional demeanor while also acknowledging injustices that hit close to home. The descent into Denver proceeded without further incident. Daniel moved through the cabin, with practiced efficiency, checking seatbelts and ensuring compliance with landing procedures. When he passed row 22, he noted that the mother and daughter were quietly looking at a drawing together, the child pointing out details with evident pride. The normalcy of the scene only underscored the unnecessary disruption Heather had caused. After landing, Daniel stood at the front of the plane, thanking passengers as they deplaned. He noticed the man who had been recording waiting until most of the cabin had emptied before approaching him. "I want you to know that I've documented everything that happened today," the man said quietly. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and what I witnessed was textbook discrimination." Daniel nodded, understanding the implied warning. "I assure you this will be addressed internally." "It should be," the man replied. "That mother and child deserve better." As the last passengers departed, Daniel made his way to the gate where he knew the station supervisor, Linda, would be waiting for their arrival. "Report." Sure enough, she was there, clipboard in hand. "How was the flight?" she asked, her standard greeting. "We need to talk," Daniel replied. "There was an incident." Linda's expression shifted immediately from routine to concern. "What kind of incident?" Daniel explained the situation as objectively as he could, though he couldn't entirely keep the frustration from his voice as he described Heather's actions and the justifiable reaction from the passengers. One of them was recording it, he concluded. He identified himself as a civil rights attorney. This could become a problem. Linda's face had grown increasingly grave as he spoke. "Where is Heather now?" "Completing the final cabin check. She should be out momentarily." "And the passenger? The mother?" "Already deplaned with her daughter." Linda made a quick note on her tablet. "I'll need to file a report immediately, and I'll want statements from both of you." Daniel nodded, familiar with the procedure for incidents that might result in passenger complaints or potential liability. "I think we should also consider reaching out to the passenger proactively," he suggested. "An official apology, perhaps compensation for the distress." Before Linda could respond, Heather emerged from the jetway, her expression still defensive. Linda motioned her over. "I need to speak with both of you," she said. "Let's go to the office." As they walked through the busy terminal, Daniel noticed the mother and daughter at the baggage claim area. The little girl was now perched on the shoulders of an older man, presumably the grandpa she had mentioned showing her drawing to. The mother was speaking animatedly, her gesture suggesting she was recounting the incident on the plane. The older man's expression darkened as he listened. Daniel felt a renewed pang of regret. What should have been a joyful family reunion was now overshadowed by an unnecessary confrontation. The damage had been done, and no amount of corporate apologies or procedural reviews would entirely erase it. In the small office adjacent to the gate area, Linda closed the door and turned to face them. "I need to understand exactly what happened from beginning to end," she said. "Heather, let's start with you." Heather's account was defensive from the outset. "I noticed a passenger, a black woman, traveling with a very light-skinned child, who didn't resemble her. Given our training on human trafficking awareness, I felt obligated to verify their relationship." "And how did you approach this?" Linda asked. "I asked if the child was hers, and then requested some form of documentation, confirming their relationship. It's a standard security measure." Daniel couldn't remain silent. It's not standard to question parents based solely on physical appearance, he interjected. The training specifically mentions behavioral indicators, not racial differences. Heather flushed. I was using my judgment. The child looked nothing like her. Because they had different skin tones, Daniel pressed. Were there any behavioral indicators? Anything besides their appearance that raised concerns? Heather's silence spoke volumes. Linda looked between them, her expression carefully neutral. Daniel, what did you observe when you arrived at the scene? I observed a mother and child who were clearly comfortable with each other, he said firmly. I also observed multiple passengers who were disturbed by Heather's questioning, including one who was recording the interaction and identified himself as a civil rights attorney. Linda's eyebrows rose at this last detail. Recording? Yes. He stated he wanted to document what he called textbook discrimination. Linda turned back to Heather. Did you follow the proper protocol for suspected trafficking situations? Heather shifted uncomfortably. I followed what I believed was appropriate given the circumstances. The protocol, Linda continued, specifically states that we look for behavioral indicators, children who appear afraid or disoriented, adults who answer for children or prevent them from speaking, inconsistent stories about travel plans. It explicitly warns against making assumptions based on racial differences between adults and children. Her tone was not accusatory but matter-of-fact. Were any of these behavioral indicators present? No, Heather admitted reluctantly. But I still think it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to children. Safety is indeed our priority, Linda agreed. But so is treating our passengers with dignity and respect. When we act on assumptions rather than observations, we fail at both. Daniel watched as the reality of the situation seemed to finally dawn on Heather. Her defensiveness began to crumble, replaced by a dawning realization. I didn't think of it as racial profiling, she said quietly. I thought I was doing my job. That's the problem, Daniel said, gentler now. Sometimes we don't recognize our own biases until they've already caused harm. Linda set her tablet down and looked directly at Heather. This incident will need to be formally documented, and there will likely be a review process, but right. Now I want you to reflect on something. If that mother and child had both been white or both been black, would you have questioned their relationship? The question hung in the air, unanswered because the answer was obvious to everyone in the room. We all have biases, Linda continued. The challenge is recognizing them before they lead us to actions that hurt others and undermine the trust our passengers place in us. Daniel nodded in agreement. Throughout his career, he had witnessed countless moments like this, moments where unexamined assumptions led to painful confrontations, where the burden of proof fell unfairly on those who didn't fit expected patterns. What happens now? Heather asked, her voice small. Now, Linda said, we document everything. We review our procedures. We ensure that something like this doesn't happen again, and we reach out to the passenger with a formal apology. She turned to Daniel. I'll need your written statement as soon as possible, and I'll need to contact our legal department, given the recording. As they left the office, Daniel found himself thinking about the little girl with the stuffed elephant. He wondered what she would remember of this day years from now, whether the excitement of flying and seeing her grandfather would outweigh the memory of her mother being questioned, of the tension and confusion that had momentarily clouded what should have been a simple journey. He hoped for her sake that the happy memories would prevail. But he also knew that such incidents left marks that weren't easily erased, not for the child, not for the mother, and not for the witnesses who had seen prejudice dressed up as procedure. As he headed to the crew lounge to write his statement, Daniel's thoughts turned to his own children, to the conversations he'd had with them about navigating a world that sometimes viewed them with unwarranted suspicion. He had hoped those conversations would become unnecessary as society progressed, but days like today reminded him of how far there still was to go. The incident would be documented, procedures would be reviewed, perhaps training would be enhanced. But the deeper work, the examination of the assumptions that had led to the confrontation in the first place, that was a journey with no simple checklist or protocol. It required a willingness to look inward, to question, to change. As he sat down to write his statement, Daniel hoped that today might be, if not a turning point, then at least a moment of reflection. For Heather, for the airline, and for anyone who witnessed what had transpired at 30,000 feet on what should have been an ordinary flight to Denver. 3 weeks had passed since the flight from Atlanta to Denver, but for Kira Thompson, the memory remained as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. She could still feel the heat of embarrassment that had flushed her face when the flight attendant had demanded proof that Lily was her daughter. She could still hear her little girl's confused voice asking, "What's discrimination, Mommy?" It was a Tuesday morning and Kira sat at her kitchen table, coffee cooling beside her laptop as she stared at the email that had arrived overnight. The subject line read, "Your interview with Channel 7 News, scheduling request." After the Thai incident, things had moved quickly. Michael Chen, the civil rights attorney who had recorded the confrontation, had reached out as promised. The airline had sent a formal apology and offered flight vouchers, which Kira had politely declined. Then Michael had connected her with a journalist who was working on a story about racial profiling in transportation. The initial article had gone viral within hours. Flying while black had trended on social media for days, with thousands sharing similar experiences of being questioned or challenged while traveling with their children. What had begun as one humiliating moment on a plane had sparked a national conversation, and now the local news station wanted an on-camera interview. Kira's father, Robert, entered the kitchen, moving with the careful gait of someone whose knees no longer fully cooperated with his intentions. At 71, he remained strong and independent, but the years had taken their expected toll. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, heading straight for the coffee pot. "You're up early." "Got an email from that reporter," Kira replied, turning the laptop slightly so he could see. "They want me to come in for an interview tomorrow." Robert peered at the screen over his reading glasses. "Are you going to do it?" It was the question Kira had been asking herself all morning. Part of her wanted to put the whole incident behind her, to focus on her work and her daughter and her life. But another part, the part that had been raised by parents who had marched for civil rights in their youth, felt a responsibility to speak up. "I'm thinking about it," she said. "I keep wondering if it will make any difference." Robert settled into the chair across from her, his coffee mug cradled between weathered hands. "You know what your mother would say?" Kira smiled despite herself. Her mother had been gone for 2 years now, but her voice remained clear in Kira's mind. Practical, determined, unwavering in her belief that speaking truth was never wasted effort. "She'd tell me that staying silent never changed anything," Kira said. "That's right." Robert nodded. "Margaret always said that change happens one voice at a time, one story at a time." The sound of small feet padding down the hallway interrupted their conversation. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching Ellie the elephant. "Good morning, sunshine," Kira said, opening her arms as Lily climbed into her lap. "Did you have good dreams?" Lily nodded, still too sleepy for words. She rested her head against Kira's shoulder, a warm, trusting weight that never failed to center Kira, to remind her of what mattered most. Robert watched them with a soft expression. "You know," he said quietly, "Lily might not remember that flight when she's older, but she'll remember what you taught her by how you responded to it." His words settled over Kira like a gentle weight of responsibility. She had raised Lily to be proud of who she was, to understand that families came in all configurations, all colors, all shapes. The incident on the plane had challenged that teaching in the most public and painful way. "I think I'll do the interview," she decided, kissing the top of Lily's head. "But I need to figure out childcare. I don't want Lily there." "I'll watch my favorite granddaughter," Robert offered immediately. "We can have a special Grandpa Day." "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," Lily murmured against Kira's shoulder, the familiar joke bringing smiles to both adults' faces. "And that makes you my favorite by default," Robert replied with exaggerated logic that made Lily giggle. As Kira prepared breakfast, her mind turned to what she would say in the interview. She didn't want to focus solely on the anger or humiliation she had felt. Those emotions were real, but they weren't the whole story. There had also been the passengers who spoke up, the woman in the window seat who vouched for her, Michael with his steady presence and recording phone. There had been, alongside the discrimination, moments of solidarity and kindness. The next morning, Kira arrived at the Channel 7 studios 20 minutes early, dressed in the deep blue blouse her mother had given her for her last birthday. It was a small gesture of connection, a way of carrying Margaret's strength with her. The reporter, Aisha Williams, greeted her in the lobby. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Thompson. I know this isn't easy." "Call me Kira, please," she replied, following Aisha through the maze of corridors that led to the studio. "We'll keep this straightforward," Aisha explained as a technician fitted Kira with a microphone. "I'll ask about what happened on the flight, how you felt, and what you hope might come from sharing your story. Just speak naturally, as if we're having a conversation." Under the bright lights seated across from Aisha, Kira felt a momentary flutter of nerves. But as the camera's red light blinked on and Aisha asked her first question, "Can you tell us what happened on that flight from Atlanta to Denver 3 weeks ago?" the nervousness faded, replaced by the simple clarity of truth-telling. "I was traveling with my 3-year-old daughter, Lily," Kira began. "About halfway through the flight, a flight attendant approached me and asked if Lily was my child. When I said yes, she demanded proof, documentation or photos showing we were related." "And why do you believe she questioned your relationship to your daughter?" Aisha asked. Kira met her gaze steadily. "Because my skin is darker than my daughter's. Lily's father is biracial, and she inherited his lighter complexion. The flight attendant saw a black woman with a lighter-skinned child and immediately assumed something was wrong with that picture." As the interview continued, Kira found herself speaking not just about the incident itself, but about its context, about the countless small moments throughout her life when her connection to her own child had been questioned or doubted. "It happens at parks, at stores, even at doctor's appointments," she explained. "People ask if I'm the babysitter or the nanny. They express surprise when Lily calls me mommy. It's constant, this need to explain or justify our relationship." "How did your daughter react to what happened on the plane?" Aisha asked. The question touched a tender spot. "She was confused," Kira said quietly. "She asked me why the lady was mad at us, and later when someone mentioned discrimination, she asked me what that word meant." She paused, steadying her voice. "She's 3 years old. I wasn't ready to have that conversation with her yet. I wanted her to be a little older before she had to learn that lesson." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that sometimes people make mistakes because they only look at the outside of a person, not who they really are. I told her that what makes a family isn't looking the same, but loving each other." Aisha nodded thoughtfully. "Other passengers spoke up for you during this incident. Can you tell us about that?" This part of the story felt important to Kira, the reminder that alongside the discrimination, there had been solidarity. "A woman sitting next to us confirmed that Lily and I had been together the whole flight. An older man said he'd seen us in the terminal before boarding, and a civil rights attorney started recording the interaction and questioned the flight attendant about the supposed policy she was enforcing." "And was there such a policy?" "No," Kira said firmly. The senior flight attendant later confirmed, "There is no policy requiring parents to prove their relationship to their children on domestic flights. What happened was based purely on assumption and bias." As the interview drew to a close, Aisha asked the question Kira had been expecting. "What do you hope will come from sharing your story today?" Kira took a moment to gather her thoughts. "I hope airlines and other transportation providers will examine their training and procedures to ensure they're not enabling discrimination. I hope people will reflect on their own assumptions about what families should look like. And most of all, I hope that by speaking up, I might spare another mother and child from experiencing what Lily and I did." She thought of her daughter, probably making cookies with her grandfather at this very moment, blissfully unaware that her mother was on television, talking about that confusing day on the plane. Children shouldn't have to justify their connection to their own parents, she continued. And parents shouldn't have to carry documentation proving their right to travel with their children based solely on different skin tones. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Kira, Aisha said as the interview concluded. After the microphone was removed and the lights dimmed, Aisha walked Kira back toward the lobby. That was powerful, she said. I think it will resonate with a lot of people. I hope it helps, Kira replied simply. Outside the studio, the spring air carried the scent of newly cut grass and approaching rain. Kira checked her phone and found a text from her father. Cookies successful, cleanup less so, take your time. She smiled, imagining the flour-dusted state of her kitchen. As she walked to her car, a notification appeared on her screen. An email from Michael Chen. Just heard about your interview today, it read. The airline has reached out. They want to discuss systemic changes to their training program and would like your input. Call me when you can. Kira paused, the weight of the message settling over her. Her story, one incident on one flight, was already creating ripples of change. As she drove home, Kira thought about the conversation she would eventually need to have with Lily. The full conversation about race and prejudice and the imperfect world they navigated together. It wouldn't be today or tomorrow, but someday soon. And when that day came, perhaps she would be able to tell her daughter not just about the injustice they had faced, but also about how speaking up had mattered. How one voice joined with others could begin to shift the direction of the current. When she arrived home, the house smelled of vanilla and chocolate. She found her father and daughter in the living room, reading a book together, cookie crumbs evidencing their afternoon snack.